So I decided to be a nurse actually when I was in high school. I had a cousin who was a nurse, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be. I really wanted to be a teacher, which I think actually leadership is about teaching. So I think my initial interest was teaching, and then I decided to be a nurse. And yeah, and I went to a local college and started nursing. So when I started nursing, I was actually at a university hospital in Philadelphia and got my master's at University of Penn and then or Pennsylvania. And then when I was there, I started working on the clinical research in the catheterization laboratory. And so I started research and sort of understand there was a whole sort of world out there doing clinical research. I loved being in the academic center and never really planned on sort of moving into pharmaceuticals. We had worked with a lot of companies. Merck was one of them, J&J, even Wyeth, which actually no longer exists as a company. But so I had that sort of exposure. And then when I was at the university, I also was a member of their institutional review board. I had some really good physicians that understood the value of clinical research, but again, had no interest in going into the corporate world. And I just, Merck recruited me at one point to work with them. And I remember one of the physicians saying to me, well, if you have to go to the pharma world, because it was sort of considered the enemy, if you have to go to the pharma world, at least you're going to Merck. And so I was in the hospital environment for 10 years and I loved it. I loved it. I was, I loved working with the patients. And then I switched over to Merck and I was actually at Merck for 10 years. So the first 3 months in the corporate world, I did not like it at all. I was like, what did I do? Because when you're in the hospital, you can't fake things. You either know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing. And you have to really work as a team. And it's okay not to necessarily be the expert in the room. There are serious situations happening. You have to really use the data you have at the time. Sometimes you have to even use your gut, if you will, to make sort of decisions on the fly. And then I get into the corporate world and it was like, well, we have to make a decision on this and let's have a committee. Oh, no, 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 we need a subcommittee. And then we need a subcommittee. I'm like, you're crazy. Like, why do we need all these committees to make not even a life or death decision? And then I also found that, there were where you left the egos at the door in the hospital setting, there was a lot of that sort of in the corporate world. So for the first 3 months, I'm sort of like, why did I do this? And then I realized that my background in nursing and my experience running clinical trials was very valuable. And so which I do in my career, I'm always like, okay, what's the angle that makes sense here? Like, how can I actually be of value? How can I use the information that I have? And then I started doing that and I found it to be, really, I felt valued. I felt it was successful and I really enjoyed it. I think that at the end of the day, it's the impact of the work that we do for the patients. So I also, and you probably have seen this on my resume, I do teach, interestingly enough. I actually do teach. I'm an adjunct professor at Temple University on a class on good clinical practices. Actually, I teach tonight. And we go back to the Declaration of Helsinki. We go back to, the Nuremberg Code, all these unfortunate tragedies that happen to patients that they weren't informed about the study, they didn't volunteer. And so the work that we do now, it's so critical. We cannot get drugs on the market for patients unless we do the work. But we have to protect the rights and the safety of the patients in our studies. So when people come to me and anything that we do now, it's interesting. I'll go back to, well, what would make sense for the patient? Like, what are we trying to do here? So at the end of the day, it really is. And that's why I love the Institute. The work here is just very impactful to patients. Kind of brings me back to my nursing days. So then I was at Merck for like almost, it was going on my 10th year, and there were folks there that were saying that, if you start to stay, you stay longer, like you were getting into those double digits, if you will. So I was recruited by a much smaller company called Shire. Unfortunately, that no longer exists. That was an amazing, amazing organization. They tapped into all the different talent from the other pharmaceutical companies. So at Merck, I really got great foundational training on how to do clinical research, but it was a Merck way. So then when I went to Shire, it was learning about the interpretation that you could have, and interpretations could be different, and there's different risk tolerance levels. And so that was an amazing experience. I had some great, female leadership leaders there that really inspired me. And then Shire was moving up to the Boston area, and I didn't want to relocate at the time. So I decided to leave, and they'd asked me like 3 times to move up. And at that point, I went off on my own a little bit to do consulting and thought, well, let me figure this out. And I was still teaching at Temple University. And it was in May of 2017 that one of the companies I was consulting with knew somebody at the foundation. And I got a phone call saying they're going to start the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation wants to open this not-for-profit pharmaceutical company to really serve the underserved. And that was about in May. And I said, well, I'm not interested. They were going to have it in Cambridge. I've already been asked to move to Boston. I'm not moving to Boston. It sounds great. And they said, well, can you help us think about how to set up quality assurance? And I did that as well. I said, yeah, I'm more than happy to help, but not necessarily interested in relocating. And long story short, by September, I had had a few conversations with people, and I'm like, you know what? This is a cause bigger than myself. We serve the lower, middle income countries. I was going back to my nursing days. How can I say no to this? So next thing I know, I'm getting an offer letter in October, and then we opened our doors in January of 2018. It was sort of a no-brainer. When we first started, there was actually just 6 of us that when the doors opened in January 2nd. And really at that point, we were building actually the processes, the foundation, if you will. And so that was our main goal at that point. And so the programs that we work on come from the foundation. And so it was really our goal was we're an affiliate of the foundation. So how do we communicate? How do we engage? How do we build the relationship with the foundations? There's a lot of focus on that. What is the work that we do that we have to execute on clinical trials? What are the processes? We are working in these countries that are, very, unique in terms of our space. And so how do we sort of, execute and navigate in those areas? So for the first year, it was just a ton of energy, excitement. This is fantastic. What are we doing? And sort of setting up all the processes. And then it was actually the following year that we had our first patient in one of our trials. And so what I've seen and what's been so exciting is that we draw such amazing talent from the industry, and everybody really is about the mission. And so that just the energy, I remember for the first 2 years, the energy was so palpable. And we were writing SOPs. I mean, we were like rolling up our sleeves and like writing SOPs, but it was such a palpable sort of energy. And so I'm sure you know that when we first were created, we was more focused on translational, and then we kind of moved into the development space. So what I love about the MRI, which is I think any place we evolve, it's always an evolution, and there's always something different. And we're 6 years in, and we are running studies in these lower middle income countries, and we're doing it well, and we're doing it as a virtual company with our service providers. And so it's just, I think it's been, hugely successful. And of course, we have opportunities, and we're always looking to grow and evolve, but it's just been we really feel good about what we've accomplished. In terms of some of the programs, yes. I mean, we have a phase 1 study for malaria vaccine, phase 2 for TB therapeutics. And then we're doing actually a phase 3 for some nutritional sort of supplement. And then we are going to be starting a phase 3 for M72. And so that's probably one of my most exciting projects, because that is going to be a lot of countries. And yeah, and that to me it's on a whole nother scale, if you will. And we've got really great we have a great quality management system that supports it. And but that's a whole nother, sort of, atmosphere for us, I would say. Well, that's a really fabulous question. So we have 162, full-time staff. And so it's sort of over the 6 years it's grew. I think by the end of the first year, we had about 30, and then it's sort of, increased. So we're about 162. And then we have this what we call workforce planning, if you will. And so we say that there's a demand of work that has to get done, which will be our internal talent. And then in addition, we'll sort of offset that with contingent workers. And then in addition to that, we are a wholly outsourced company. We use service providers. So we then use various models of working with our external partners to get that work done. So we're very particular and intentional about our growth. We're making sure that we're really clear about what do we need from an internal capability perspective versus external, and really are thoughtful about that. So I'm sure that you're aware that our CEO, we're our second CEO. So Penny had she had left a few years ago, and then we have a current CEO, Emilio, and he's going to be retiring. He had actually worked at the foundation, and he'll be retiring this summer. And so I keep telling everybody it's version 3.0 of the MRI. You know, when we were created, there was probably a lot of questions in the industry, like who are they? What are they going to do? You know, and in that time we have, you know, established the MRI, we've hired the right people, set up the systems. We have an amazing portfolio. Emilio brought a level of science and rigor that he really looked at our programs, which was great. And I think now with the next CEO, it's about where's our global equity. I mean, we are doing it. We are running trials here, and getting out there and really saying, we're able to run phase 3 studies, and we're able to do it not just once but over again in these very unique countries. And so I think I'm excited for what I'm calling version 3.0. I think you're absolutely correct about that, and I think that they see the value in it, and that's very exciting. I also think that you saw some efficiencies in clinical trials implementations. You saw that because you had to. And so a lot of what we're trying to do too is learn from that. Where were those efficiencies? Because there are a lot of complaints about how long it takes. And during the pandemic, things were a lot faster. And so, can we take those learnings, if you will, and do that moving forward? So it's my 20th year, believe it or not. I think I went back. It's my 20th year doing it, and I love it. And they're all graduate students, and they've been in the pharmacy school or come from the industry. It really forces me to stay up on the policies, the procedures, the thought process from the regulators. I have noticed that, as you were saying earlier, there is an increase in public trust in terms of the science and how we're doing things. And I really want to be part of that. And I say to the students that I'm learning as much from them. I don't have all the information, and I can't keep up on everything. And so it's a dialogue, and I thoroughly really enjoy it. I learn from them, they learn from me. It keeps me on my toes. And what I would say to, the one thing with the MRI is we have a lot of, female leadership on our senior LT. We also, you probably are aware, have a lot of female leadership as well on our board. And so I get asked a lot about that. And I'm proud of that. I feel very privileged to work here. I feel very privileged to work for an organization that is so mission driven and working on a cause greater than all of us. I'm so proud to work with a lot of amazing women leaders and scientists. And so I get asked a lot about, what would you do? And even at the temple, like, how do you develop your career? And the one thing I will say to people is really focus on the opportunities that are out there. Don't worry so much about the promotions and the title. Really try to fill up your toolbox. I always say that you want as much in your toolbox, and that just means learning from anybody and everybody. I always joke, I don't want to be the smartest in the room. I want to go in and learn from folks. I do believe, and maybe naive, that it does bring you somewhere. If you really are focused on the experience and learning and growing and the impact that you can have, I think it takes you somewhere. I feel very strongly as a leader that I'm having impact on the people that show up. I want them to feel valued. I want them to feel that this is the best environment for them to deliver on their work. And the same thing with the students. They keep in touch with me. And I like that. I think we need to support other women, but I also think we should support each other. it's actually, yes. So from my experience, I mean, I can only speak from my experience, and I did actually read something a little while ago that it is changing, that the numbers are going up with women in the C-suite, the C-suites and things like that, which is great, and I love that. Do I think it's where it needs to be? No, of course not. I don't think in the world it's where it needs to be in terms of female leadership. Um, what I say to folks though is I always it's so important for women to show up authentically and to be who they are. And I feel that, I can be very direct, I can be very transparent. And sometimes for some leaders, male or female, that can be like, oh, Debbie's direct. Um, I've decided a long time ago that this is who I am, and I'm going to show up and be that. And and when I was at Shire, when they had asked me to take over GMP QA, and I never worked in GMP, and I was the female leader with all males, and it was very uncomfortable. I remember going to these meetings, not even understanding the manufacturing space. But the female leader that led the group that wanted me to take the job, she said, I'm not hiring you for your subject matter expertise. I'm hiring you because your ability to collaborate, put teams together, problem solve, etc. So what I've said to people is focus on what you're bringing to the table. So if I'm in a room full of, and it happens here, I've been here for 6 years, and the science for the work that we're doing is so complicated. And I joke with my colleagues and say, I've been sitting in these meetings for 6 years, and I'm still not sure I totally understand the science. But I don't beat myself up for that, because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to help them operationalize their science knowledge. So if we're going to walk into a room and focus on what we're not bringing, you're going to fail. 100% you're going to fail. You walk into the room and focus on what you are bringing, and hopefully everybody is bringing something to the table. I would say that I know people the one question I would hate in interviews is, do you have a 5-year plan? And the reason I don't like it is I think you should have maybe a guide, but not a plan. You have to be open to the opportunities. If you would have told me that I was a nurse, I was, I didn't have a ton of confidence that I was doing it. If you would have told me I'd be here as a COO of Bill and Melinda Gates Medical Research Institute, of calls that's like amazing, there's just no way that I could have planned this path. And so I would say that be open to the experiences, be open to meeting people, chat with people, build your toolbox, do things because you're adding value, not because it's a title or it's going to get you ahead.